Hey everybody, welcome back. Here we have another guest today, Dario Giomi, somebody I've known for 20 years now. He's got a phenomenal story that he wants to share with you all, and we really hope that his story of adversity and his comeback story and then being able to help people is really going to be able to go out there and help others, especially those that are in the law enforcement veteran community. So, Dario, thank you. Appreciate it.
Good to see you,
So,
Chad.
a little bit about Dario. He was born and raised in Sonoma County, more specifically Petaluma, California. He graduated high school in 2001, joined the Army in 2003 to 2007. That's actually where I met him. Met him in 2005 when he was an Army recruiter. From there, he exited the Army, became a San Francisco sheriff's deputy in 2007, was part of the terrorism liaison officer team on the emergency services unit. Then, ironically, one of the only people I've ever met in my 20 years of service was activated on the IRR during the surge of Afghanistan. So was brought in the inactive ready reserve from 2009 to 2010 to go to Afghanistan, which we'll dive into that because I remember I was home on leave when you were getting ready to go. And came back from that deployment. Then he left the San Francisco Sheriff's Department in 2013 to join the Petaluma Police Department to give back to his local community. And there he served on the SWAT and gang units and was also a firearms instructor until about a few years ago when he was medically retired and then left California and moved to Idaho.
That's it.
Well, like we said, Dario, thank you. So why don't you just tell everybody what it was growing up in Sonoma County and then what brought you to join the Army, what that was like.
So growing up, home life was a little unstable. My parents split when I was pretty young. My dad and my half brother dealt with a lot of addiction issues, using opiates. A lot of my dad's side of the family is plagued with that. But my mom did a great job in shielding me from a lot of that and having like the best childhood I could with, like parents that were awesome in their own ways, but flawed at the same time. So me and my sister lived with my mom and grew up like probably right below the middle class level. And then went to public high school, like really into auto shop, metal shop, welding, and kind of always in the background knew that I was going to get into law enforcement. Used to read like SWAT magazines. You could find them at Safeway and these other grocery stores. Did a little like Soldier of Fortune magazine reading, which was like the big thing in the 90s, I think. And then through high school, towards the end of high school, I wasn't a good student, like C's and B's, maybe like an A in welding or something, not like in the core subjects. And I thought I was going to go into the Navy and be a welder. I don't know why. I really enjoyed welding, but my grandfather was in the Army Air Corps, my mom's dad. And then both my uncles were in the Army during the Vietnam War. One got drafted and one enlisted, and one went to Vietnam in like 68, 69, got injured, and the other one went to Fort Ord and was a cook the whole time and had a much different Army experience. Met his wife there and then got out after a few years. And then after my other uncle that got wounded in Vietnam, he came back and he was out of the Army. But yeah, for some reason I was like, I'll join the Navy and, sail around on carriers and stuff. I had these like big dreams. And then in 2001, when I graduated, I ended up joining and then being what's called a DEP loss, where you don't ship. So you enlist, and I just no-showed. For everybody wondering what happens, nothing happens. You just, as a recruiter, you take a loss. And so if you have a mission of putting 2 people in the Army and you take a DEP loss, if you don't have anyone in the Army, you start at a -1. So it's not a good thing for recruiters. And I think as we go on through the story, I think God made me a recruiter because I was a dep loss, and I just live out that Army mission. So I ended up being a dep loss, and then a year later, I went back and joined, shipped out March 5th, 2003. So joined as a scout both times. And I actually went back, saw my same guidance counselor. He thought it was pretty funny. And then joined with the same exact contract to go to Europe. So 2003, I get to basic training. That was like right when Iraq was kicking off. And we watched a lot of that in reception. And then went through basic training, AIT, and got to Europe and went to Germany. And as soon as I get there, I initially had orders to go to this infantry unit out of Schweinfurt. And then when I got to the reception in Germany, my orders got changed to go to 1-1 Cav. So I get picked up. This NCO that picked us up is like, hey man, don't get too comfortable in Germany. Your unit's in Iraq. You'll be there in a week or two. So while that week or two was going on, my uncle that got injured in Vietnam ended up dying unexpectedly, and Red Cross allowed me to fly home, helped me get home. I went to the funeral. I was in California for 5 days, which is actually when I met my wife, when I was home on leave, just totally randomly. So I get back from the funeral, go back to Germany, get on a plane, go to Kuwait, end up in Baghdad at Camp Slayer. And I was there for 7 months. We got finished up with our tour, went down to Kuwait. We put the Bradleys and tanks on Hets, drove down with those to Kuwait. And then in April of 2000, Sadr, the cleric, like militia leader, was causing problems in Baghdad and the surrounding areas. So, guys had gone home on like the advance party back to Germany and stuff. We had all of our Bradleys and tanks and Humvees cleaned up on the boat in Kuwait to go back to Europe. And that our XO was like, saw me and my buddy and was like, hey guys, can you get everybody rounded up? Because at 1700 we're going to have a meeting. Okay, sure. It's my buddy's birthday. And so we go round everybody that we could find up, like outside of the chow hall, and the XO's like, hey, things are picking back up in Iraq, and unfortunately our orders have changed and we got to go back. And I mean, you talk about the morale just taking a huge shit. It was like people are making phone calls. The guys in Germany now have to get their like A and B bags set back up, rucksacks, everything, and come fly back to Baghdad. So we took a few days to get back to Baghdad, and it was kind of crazy when we first got there, and then we had like no missions for a week, and we ended up going and sitting in Abu Ghraib, like right outside of the prison, not knowing what was going on, like Easter of 2004. And so we were there for a week doing combat operations out there, and then we came back and it was like still no mission. And then the units were just getting just having a rough time out there. So we started taking combat patrols out there and more reconnaissance to figure out like who was supporting Sadr and his militia. Yeah, just doing a lot more recon than we did the last time, or the last mission, where it was like, hey, go find this guy. Hey, go support this element to go like bring in armor. This time it was just like a bunch of recon patrols and yeah, just different roles. And so after 3 months of that, we got sent back to Europe. And so, and no one believes it because you hear all the barracks lawyers talking and stuff. And it's like, hey, we're actually going home. And it's like, okay, like we remember what happened. We literally went right back to the Republican Guard barracks that we had in 2000, like when we got there in 03. Like all the stuff and Maxim posters were still on the wall. It was like, Giomi, you're going back to your bunk. Like everybody had the same assignment, and it was just really demoralizing. So we get back to Germany, and that was like some awesome garrison life. The army back then was a lot different. There was just like a hierarchy where it didn't really matter like as much with rank as like, do you have a combat patch and do you have like this and that? And it was, it felt pretty cool to be on top, not really knowing that doesn't mean much anyways. Like you guys are all there doing the same thing, signing up for the same reasons, and just because you got deployed and someone else didn't, it's like these are E4s, E5s, E6s. You're not like division commanders jockeying for who's going to go on what deployment to Afghanistan or Iraq. It's just luck of the draw. You're in this unit, the unit's going, and you go do your thing and come back. So, garrison life was cool. We were always waiting for like the next mission. Like, hey, are we going to Africa? Are we going to this? And like General Bell and the First Armored Division commanders, like, are all user commanders trying to figure out like what's next for their soldiers. And we ended up not getting deployed. And then in 2000, so when I got back in 2004, my mom got re-diagnosed with some non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was like a pretty bad diagnosis and prognosis. So I remember like I went and talked to this Army chaplain, and it was more of just like, hey, can we like pray for my mom or do this or do like just some sort of like emotional support outside of just drinking booze and partying. And somehow he ended up, well, not somehow, but he ended up talking to, I don't know, my commander or first sergeant. They pulled me in and they're like, hey, we're going to get you a hardship discharge and ship you back home. And I still had 2.5 years left on my contract. I'm like, well, I'm not trying to get out of the Army. I just came in here like, aren't you the chaplain? Like, can we say a prayer for my mom? Because my mom was by herself at the time and my sister had moved out and stuff. So there was like no one to take her to chemo and this and that. So somehow between command and like a retention NCO, they're like, we got this great program. It's called Hometown Recruiting. And we think you'd be a great candidate. Right now, USAREC's looking for soldiers that just got back from a deployment to go back home, like connect with civilians and future soldiers there, tell them what it's like in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever you went, and, start putting people in the Army. And I was like, well, I guess I could do that. It'll keep me in the Army. And, and then comes the Army thing like, hey, here's what we need you to do, buddy. Before we can get you a contract, we need you to re-enlist. And I'm like, this doesn't sound right. We need you to re-enlist needs of the Army. And I'm like, dude, I know like my ticket's going to get punched. I'm going to Korea the second I re-enlist, and, they're going to have, the Army's going to have bigger, better plans for me. But I ended up re-enlisting, submitting a packet, and that's painful because everyone was getting DA selected for recruiting and drill sergeant. And here I am like, here you go, Army. Like, let me sign up and give you a few more years as needs of the Army. So, I initially got orders for Southern California, and it's like, okay, like at least I'm CONUS, so back in the United States, I can fly or drive up from Southern California to the Bay Area and help my mom out like some of the time. And one of my recruiters, this dude, Sergeant Luckett, just like, I don't know, like did me a solid and pulled whatever clout he had and got me a spot at the Petaluma recruiting station where I signed up. And so that was rad. Like I found that out as I'm going to recruiting school. And, just some funny stories like that people appreciate. I had this buddy that ended up being, he got called back also. He was in my wedding and he had got to our unit like right when we got back. We got a new platoon sergeant, this southern black dude from, I forget where he PCS'd from. I guess maybe like drill sergeant, that path. And my buddy, this dude Wood, was like, oh shit, that was our drill sergeant. Like, he hates me, but like he likes me, and he thinks I'm a squared away dude. So I think things should be good. He was a light scout, so he had no idea about Bradley's, and still kind of had the drill sergeant talking him like, come here, motherfucker, like all this, like, just funny dude, squared away NCO, awesome platoon sergeant. And so I just got to be in the platoon for a couple weeks with him. My buddy Wood's like, hey, dude, in basic training, when we were cleaning up and stuff, we would sneak into the drill sergeant's office and and take pictures with his drill sergeant cover. And he's like, I got pictures of me in like his full battle rattle and all this. And he's like, check them out. And so I'm looking at my buddy, like wearing his drill sergeant hat, looking all stupid. And so I'm walking out to the front gate because they had like, German gate guards, and like it was like a third party doing gate guards. So I'm walking out there, and this dude, Sergeant Williams, shows up, and he's like, hey, G, you want to ride? And I was like, yeah, man. So he gives me a ride, and this is like the last time I've ever seen him. He gets ready to drop me off at the gate, and I was like, hey, dude, you need to talk to Wood about some pictures he took when he was in your platoon in basic training at IIT. The fuck you talking about, Giomi? And I'm like, just ask him about it. Like, it's funny. And so, like a day later, my buddy Wood's like, dude, that was fucked up. Like, we got our balls smoked, just, I guess he just smoked the shit out of him for a while because he ended up finding the pictures, and I dimed him out. And that was like the last thing I did in Germany. So I go to Fort Jackson for recruiting school, and it's kind of like at the height of deployments and stuff. It's '05, like Fallujah's cracking off again, all the EFPs, like stuff's just going south. We got like two full-blown wars going on, and then people are getting DA selected to go to recruiting school and just hating life. So I get there, and all these NCOs are like, I'm gonna get out of this. Like, I ain't going to recruiting. I'm going back to my unit. Blah blah blah. And the school NCOs and stuff are like, this is your mission now. Like, the Army doesn't always do what you want. You need to just accept that you're going to be a recruiter for a few years, and then you can go back to your unit. So like day 2, it's time for PT tests. And it's like, I just came from a scout platoon where, like, they'll put you in like fat boy PT if you're not scoring 250s and higher. And I was in good shape. So we do the PT test, and I'm like kind of sucking wind because I just went from Germany to it's July at Fort Jackson. So like not used to the humidity. And so I'm running, I'm like, cool. I come in like 14 minutes and some change. But so going back to the push-ups and stuff, the Army rule back then was like, if you don't get to 10, you just go back to the end of the line. And so dudes are like, I'm just going to fail my PT test. Maybe I'll get a bad NCOER going back to my unit. And so these dudes, that you could see are scoring like 70s and above. They'll have like the fitness patch on their PT shirt, do 12 push-ups. And the NCOs, right or wrong, are like 60. Good job. And they're like, what? What's going on? So dude gets in line, dudes, like lots of people, sit-ups, 11, 70 sit-ups. Great job, Sergeant. Go over to the run. And then they're like, I'm just going to walk. And they just told everybody, like they formed us all up, and they're like, you're passing this PT test because we know you can. Otherwise, you would have been profiled. You wouldn't have been able to get DA selected, like all this stuff. Like, so you passed your PT test. Don't fight it. Because what's going to happen is if you sit here and you just, go through the school, you don't learn anything, you don't practice anything, you're going to go to your recruiting station, be ate up, and from there, they'll write you up, and like it's going to ruin your Army career. So this is where you're at in the Army, blah, blah, blah. And we ended up like just having I thought it was a pretty good class. So few months go by. I think it's like 8 or 9 weeks. So 2 months, 2.5 months. We graduate from the recruiting school, and I go to my unit, or my station in the North Bay in the Bay Area. I do pretty good. Obviously in 2005, for the people listening, Chad was showing up at the recruiting station when he was like 12 and a half years old. And my station commander would be like, get that kid out of here until he can actually join the Army. So,
which is funny because in 2005, right?
Yeah, I know. You were like 15 or 16.
Yeah, that's when we were looking at doing that split option, but my birthday fell in October, so it didn't work.
Yeah. So, that's when I met you, and stayed in contact, whatever it was, once a month or whatever. And then a lot of recruiters would get overweight, and I didn't. So then I ended up, because I was like the newer guy, I'd have to go run with the fat kids. Like sometimes I'm running 3, 4, 5 miles a day on recruiting when like realistically no one's doing anything related to PT unless it's on their own. And that's the way it was like from 05 to 07. But just because I was new, I'd have to go do PT with like everybody. They just assigned me times to go run with people. And I like staying in shape. And then I knew that, like maybe 2006, I knew that I was going to get into law enforcement and I was going to be done with the Army. So got out of, well, I ended up getting hired by San Francisco Sheriff's Department because like I just take my government vehicle to these like networking things, go take a test, for like this department or that department, and always making phone calls trying to put the next soldier in on the way to and from. And then in 2007, in July, I start the academy while I'm on terminal leave. Probably 3 weeks into the academy, my mom ended up passing away. Depending on where you want to go with the mental health side of things, like I didn't process any of that. She died on a Saturday, and then I went back to the academy on a Monday, and then her funeral was the next Saturday, and then I went back to the academy on a Monday, and just kind of like, I'll just throw that in the rucksack and deal with that trauma or memory later. And it had already kind of started um, with Iraq, with doing that, and just anxiety. And one of my NCOs, like him and I were close, but he ended up dying. Like, he made it through like a 15-month deployment and got in a car wreck like 2 weeks after we got back. And same thing, like I just put that in the back, and then our platoon leader, this like awesome dude, Lieutenant Badger, ended up on like a railhead in Germany, hitting a power line, and got like super messed up and ended up dying like a month and a half later from his injuries from that. Same thing, like didn't process it, put that in the back. So my mom passes away. I go back to the academy, do pretty good in the academy, then get assigned to a county jail in San Francisco. So I go out to this county jail, and within the first couple weeks, I was like, working in the jail is not for me. And I was ready to quit. And I got put with a dude that ended up being my mentor and like really changed my viewpoint on the sheriff's department, work in custody, doing some of the other stuff. And I ended up staying. 2007 rolls into 08, and then 08 rolls into 09. And I think it was like, so in 2008, I get engaged, and we plan the wedding for March of 2009, like March 21st. And in February of 2009, the president gets on TV, is President Obama, and he talks about like Afghanistan and the U.S. and coalition troops basically kind of struggling to keep things under wraps and under control, and then wanting to hand the country over to Afghanistan with a time frame and stuff. And he said he authorized 30,000 troops for a troop surge. And I just looked at the TV. I'm like, well, that sucks. And grab all my stuff and go to work. So a month later, I get someone at the door, bing bong, run to the door and stuff, open it up. And this FedEx dude hands me this envelope with 1 million postage stickers and things on it. And it says HRC St. Louis, the U.S. Army Human Resources Command. Well, that's weird. What would they want from me? Open it up, and it's a set of orders that said that I had been relieved of my IRR status and, getting back into the Army not to exceed 400 days in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And, it had all the finance paperwork, all your S1 stuff, your human resources stuff to get back into the Army. And I was just like, well, this sucks. This one, I did everything I was supposed to while I was in the Army. 2, I'm getting married. 3, I signed up for this knowing full well that the military service commitment or obligation, your MSO, is 8 years. And I need to honor my word, but also how can I get out of this? Because it sucks. I'm supposed to be going and getting married in a month and a half. They want me to report 28 days after I get married. And I was supposed to go to Coast, out on the border of Afghanistan. I'm like, well, it's a shithole out there. And I was just, thinking about I already have a second career, another career going. I don't really want to die. I don't want to get injured. And I'm getting married, and my wife Amanda was freaking out, and my family was just kind of broken up. And I'm like, well, this is what I have to do. So let me see if I could get out of it through work. So through a captain at the sheriff's department, I make the plea for a letter justifying why I shouldn't be deployed, because that's one of the ways out. And the sheriff was like, hey, one, we have over 800 deputies. You're not a supervisor here. And we support, what the United States is doing overseas. And so that didn't work. So I ended up leaving, we get married. And I ended up leaving April 19th, 2009. And while I'm in training, this other kid that I put in the Army, I was at Fort Knox. He ended up getting killed overseas in Iraq by an Iraqi soldier that went rogue and killed him and another dude from California. And that kind of hit hard just with knowing him and the family. And I was like, well, it's real. We're back. I'm back in. People good dudes and good gals are getting killed overseas, and I just don't want to be here. And so I get to go meet up with the unit that's training, and it's a National Guard unit out of Georgia. And I meet this first sergeant lieutenant, and they're the first sergeant was super cool dude, Ranger qualified. He was a police officer in Georgia and just did the National Guard stuff. So him and I started talking. He's like, hey, we're excited to get you over here, at Scout NCO with a previous deployment. And I think he liked me because I was a cop. When we were in Kuwait, so he went with an advance party to go to Coast. And while I was in Kuwait, his second mission, he got killed in action in Coast. And I was like, yep, this is the tone that it's setting. Like, I'm not even there yet. Our first sergeant's been killed. And like, I haven't even put boots on the ground. And like, my new wife's back at home. I have a job at home. Like, what is going on here? And so, just like with the kid Jake Veloza that I put in that got killed, now the first sergeant, like, we'll just put him in the wreck and just I'll just hang on to that for later. And get through the so I get to Kabul with like my soon to be best friend that was a cop in Southern California, and like I just hung out with him a couple days ago. But at this point now, it's like I'm not gonna let the army like split us up. Like if something happens, at least I'm going like I know this dude. We're in the same profession, and like him and I'll keep each other safe. And we ended up staying together the whole time. Like got room together in these barracks that eventually got built. We were on the same truck together for the whole deployment, and ended up coming back. We left Afghanistan St. Patty's Day 2010, and we get back to Fort Stewart, and we're like augmentees to this unit. Like some of the cool things for like the Army guys and listening, they're like that are listening when we got there, it's like, hey Giomi, when do you want to go on leave? You have like some LT asking you, and I'm like, is he really asking me when I want to go to on leave? Because I'm about to say something stupid and see if it sticks. And I was like, Christmas? And they're like, you got it. And I was like, whoa. Like, how did I'm the new guy, but it was just that their battle roster was already figured out. Leave was already scheduled before they ever took off. And I'm just like an extra body. So my buddy went home Thanksgiving. I went home Christmas on leave. And at the end of the deployment, they're like, hey, are you coming to the welcome home ceremony? And it's like, I don't know a single person in Georgia. Like, you guys are all from Georgia. You're all like, I just want to go home, be with my wife, go back to work, and just kind of like honor my service, but forget it. Like, I'm done. Like, I'm out of the Army again. And so my buddy and I just got plane tickets, went back to California, and I took like 2 weeks off and went right back to work. So I never went back to the jail. I went to San Francisco General Hospital, and like there's 40 something or 50 deputies there. And not being from San Francisco, I was like, why are there this many deputies at a hospital? And it was just it's a complete S show. Like gangsters getting in fights there. I took a couple guns out of the hospital. Yeah, it was wild, but that's where some of the other like pieces of my mental health started falling apart. Seeing sad stories in there, but we were like in my eyes orderlies kind of for psych patients. So you get these psych patients that are just out of their mind on drugs and schizophrenic or whatever. They try and fight nurses, and then they'd call the deputies, and you know like fist fights. I didn't get into any like one in junior high, and other than that, like I wasn't fighting anybody. Pushed around and manhandled like some Iraqi folks, like when we do raids and stuff, but like we weren't like doing rock'em sock'em robots. Um, and so I had never been like my house was full of neglect and dysfunction, but not physical violence. And so like the physical violence, not like run around with a gun in Iraq or Afghanistan, but like punching and kicking and elbowing and hurting people was not like a part of my thing. So that changed really quick. And we would get into these crazy brawls with these psych patients, and we wouldn't leave until we won. And I never did anything that was excessive, but it's like hitting people with batons, punching people in the face, elbow. Yeah, it was crazy, and it was changing me, and I didn't really understand that. One time, like the craziest fight that I ever got into was this guy that didn't want to take his meds. It was me and another deputy, and uh he goes and grabs this dude, and he, he gets punched, and they punch each other, and it looked like, the only thing I could think of is like it looked like one of the hockey fights where it's like you have my jersey, I have yours, and we're just throwing right hands at each other as hard and as fast as we can until like something drops. And I remember hitting that dude also as hard as I could, and at one point I hit him, and it's like this crazy dude with old man strength that is just out of his flipping mind. And like he like folds up, and he just like came right back to life. Like his like knees folded up, he dropped down, and it's like boop, 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 and like he just respawned, and put out on the radio that we're fighting and stuff. And my buddy ended up like having a heart issue. Like we were fighting to the point of exhaustion. The elevators are always occupied, so all these deputies had to run up to the 7th floor. Like, and I just remember the doors opening, and it was like, dude, thank God you're here, because like we're like gassed out. My buddy has the dude didn't turn to me a single time to hit me. Like I was just hitting him, and he was hitting my partner. We don't have weapons because we're in a psych ward. So it's like worst case scenario, if you have a pocket knife that you didn't put away in your lockbox, like I guess you could stab somebody. But outside of that, we didn't have anything. And so, they rip us apart, and he is like pretty messed up from what he, I guess, had a previous heart condition. And I don't know if it like stressed him out or whatever and just maxed him out, but he ended up spending like 3 days in the hospital in like a cardiac ICU, like for monitoring. But, that was like my first, like, oh, this is like for reals here with the fighting. And I wasn't into jujitsu. Still have never done jujitsu. I feel like I've just gotten lucky to where, I had never gotten seriously hurt. Like another time, this was just to like build context, like for how crazy these guys were. But we went into a psych emergency services unit, and there was probably like 6 of us. And this dude's like, I know I'm going to get beat up, but I'm going to knock one of you out. And so he's talking to my buddy and stuff. And we didn't have tasers. Pepper spray is like kind of discouraged in these units because it'll just mess the whole unit up for hours. And so my buddy like shoots in and like grabs this dude, and other deputies are trying to subdue him, and he's going crazy. And I pulled out my like straight stick, and this supervisor looks up at me, and he like pulls this dude's leg, and I hit it like hard enough times to where he gave up, and it ended up uh, like really messing up his leg. It broke his like the bones around his knee and stuff. And I was just like, what am I like? This is wild that we're doing this day after day after day. And it started to change me, and I didn't really understand it. And, at that time, it was just like, I was doing a good job. I was on the ESU, the emergency services unit. I was going to all this training for the terrorism liaison officer stuff. I really started getting into like the narcotics thing, and like just trying to understand that role more, probably because of my dad and my brother. And really, I didn't really realize that yet. But, I was just like, I'm going to go to another agency, and I'm going to arrest every drug addict, every drug dealer, every bad guy. And, at that time I was still having fun, but some of the violence and stuff I was just not really into, and witnessing the violence that people were, when you work in a trauma center, like you see the other violence that people are doing to each other. And it was just like kind of depressing. So there was this one time, like there was a vehicle burglary down the street. And so my buddy went down there, found them, and they were coming back towards the hospital. And uh, the buddy that was in that fight that tackled the dude that I was just talking about with the baton thing, him and I go out there, and there's two guys, and they see us and they kind of split up. So we're in the middle of like 23rd Street in San Francisco, and I'm yelling at the guy, "Stop!" And he's like, kind of trying to figure out if he's going to run. I grab him and do like this bar arm. Now we're fighting in the middle of the street. I get him subdued. Like, give me your hands, give me your hands. And I pull out a revolver out of his pocket. And I'm just a smart aleck. And I'm like, hey, thanks for not shooting me, man. He's like, man, I ain't going to shoot no cop. I'm like, it's San Francisco, they just, it's like catch and release. And I didn't even think about it like until later, but I kind of rethought some of the way that I do things like tactically, because that could have not ended well for me if he took his free arm and just did the old boom, 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 and shot me a couple times. It could have been a lot worse. That was like towards the end of my some of the cool things I got to do in San Francisco is work a World Series parade for the Giants. It's getting to go to that and being at the plaza and stuff. Like, it's an awesome time. And just learning a lot, like jail operations, how criminals work inside jails. There's some street smarts that I'd never get if I never worked in the jail. It was just time for me to move on. I wanted to get into patrol, the SWAT team, stuff like that. So 2013, after like 6 or 7 years at the sheriff's office, I left and went to Petaluma PD. You want me to just keep going?
Yeah, because tell your Petaluma PD stuff, because I think after that, that's really going to open up a lot of the questions, and then how you had to start unpacking everything.
Yeah.
Because I think it's super interesting to me because I've known you throughout this entire time. Like, I've watched, and I remember a lot of these stories, and yeah, I'm gonna have some like some questions I'll ask like at the end on like, because as I thought about this before we were talking, and when I saw you a week ago, was how you used to take a lot of that stuff that now, because like you're really big into the the mental health and like trauma, like taking care of a lot of that, and how after you get through this, like how you process it. Because I remember, because I would talk to you those times it would go a while, but maybe once a month, once every couple months. It was almost like how you were processing it was completely different than the way you do it now.
For sure.
So.
And I was like, oh man, I got on a roll and I should backpedal. So coming back from Afghanistan, I get back we were probably at Stewart and like Manas Air Base and stuff. Like, so we left Afghanistan. It probably took a week for me to fly home and get to the airport. And there's a bunch of people, waiting at the airport and stuff. And like, this is one of the things that I've had to process, but that kid, Jake's dad, was there at the airport. And I was like, man, why would this guy come to the airport? Like I feel like the very last time he was at the airport for a soldier's coming home was his son in a casket draped with a flag. And I'm like, how, like, just knowing what that guy thought of his son going into the military, and not that he wasn't proud of him, but like, he talked about a bunch of his friends and people he knew and family members and stuff that either came back changed or came back in a casket or came back like injured. And he really did not want his son to go in. But it's like the pride that he had in his son's service in our professional relationship. It's like the next time he's coming to San Francisco airport is to welcome me home. And, that was something that I really struggled with recently until probably a year ago. Because I kind of like I showed emotion, during that. And then I just did like what you should do, which is, in that sarcasm, just put it in the rucksack and I'll deal with it later. So, yeah, sorry for backtracking.
No.
So that happened. And then, and I'll just be real because I feel like we sugarcoat some of the stuff that goes on in the lives of soldiers and sailor, like service members and cops and firefighters. Because like you see them at work and it's like, oh, so and so's got their stuff together and their home life is a mess. So when I got back, like from Afghanistan, probably a couple weeks after, there was a barbecue at the sheriff's department, and it was like the sheriff like having a shooting competition with like our DSA president, the Sheriff's Association president, and I was just like full of angst and anxiety and stuff because the whole time I was gone, I was convinced that I was going to get killed. And I just started putting walls up. Like, this is a woman that I love so much that I'm like, I want to spend the rest of my life with you and get married and enjoy marriage. And I was not doing well on the inside. So, and I just put up all these walls. Emails were like really long at first, and then it was just like, hey, we went on a patrol. It wasn't that bad. I'm going to the chow hall and I'm going to watch a movie. Love you. Bye. Like that was like our emails. And she'd send these like really long emails that were like well worded and loving and caring. And I was just like, I'll just put up a wall. That way, if I do get killed, like she won't miss much. So we're getting ready to go to this shooting competition to watch, support the Sheriff's Association. And it was at the airport range. And she gets in the car, like we don't have kids or anything. So we had been together, married for like 4 weeks now, like 10 months or a year was spent, 11 months was spent training and going to Afghanistan. But like we had been in the US married for probably 3 weeks total, a couple weeks before, and now this like week or two after. And I got irritated at something, maybe that we were running late or she said something, and I was just maxed out. And I didn't tell her that because like I'm a crappy communicator and I was a lot worse back then. But I pulled over at this Chevron and I was like, get out of the car. She's like, what? I'm like, get out of the car. And I didn't say it like that. But I was just like so maxed out and didn't know how to like feel any other emotion besides anger, which was wrapped up in fear and anxiety, that I was just like, get out of the car. And I left her at Chevron. And I drove around like for probably a couple minutes and had this moment of clarity like, you're an asshole, dude. And she didn't do anything. And I went back and picked her up, and it was kind of silent. And we went to the shooting thing and not really pretended like nothing happened. But that was the first time that I was like an asshole to her. And that got out of control. Like, and there's never been anything like, my thing is not like physical violence. It's just shut down and get her as far away from me as I can because I don't want to feel any real feelings. And it was just like completely uncalled for. That's when we started, and like my wife called me on it, but that's when we started. Like, one, I got into the VA for therapy, and two, we started seeing a couples counselor. And like to this day, like I think like next Thursday, we have a counseling appointment. But we could talk more about that because sometimes it's like, oh yeah, hey, the kids drew these awesome little paintings. And sometimes it's like real stuff where it's like me shutting down again, or like there's a communication barrier. And it's like going to the gym. If you only go to the gym when you get fat and like out of shape, you're just always going to be chasing this. You're going to be unhealthy for a lot of the time. And then like you'll peak and then you'll just, hey, I'm pretty good now. I can stop going to the gym and stop working out. And then you're just going to like, and it's the same thing with like communicating with your spouse. So, I now moving back to where I left off earlier with the police department. I get in there in 2013. My cousin works there. His name's Dario Giomi, which is always funny. Like when we'd go on calls, it's like, "Hey, I'm Mario. I'm Dario." People like, "Oh gosh, the two Keystone cops showed up." But it was fun. So I'm kind of learning the ropes of patrol at a police department, and just trying to make a name for myself, and prove some competence, and trying to get into the SWAT team, and looking at like the firearms instructor position. And I don't know if I was on the SWAT team yet. I was a firearms instructor, but like one of the first calls of like, whoa, this is kind of wild for me. Maybe I'd already been on the SWAT team, but I was a firearms instructor, and I had just gotten a new taser. And so we switched from like these X26s to like an X26P. And you read it, I was a taser instructor. And I know that like when you get new equipment, like in the booklet, it'll say like always practice before like putting this out in the field and like actually utilizing it. So a buddy and I had just gone to lunch, and I get called back to like, "Hey, we're going to swap out your taser," like this senior guy. So he gives me the new taser, and it came with like a new Blackhawk holster. And I was like, "Huh, that's kind of interesting." And like looking at the button and stuff and how it worked. And I'm like, "Yep, I'll figure that out later." And from there, I get sent to a call with like the buddy that I had lunch with got sent to a disturbance down at this gas station. And it started like ramping up really fast. It was like shirtless, and he's arguing with others. So you're like, he's probably smoking methamphetamine. And it's a big like day labor population. And every most of the time they're cool, and then there's always someone that drinks too much or whatever, and they start causing a problem. So he's saying that like the guy like has his bike, and he's trying to like hit him with the bike. So I pull up there after getting the new taser, and this dude is shirtless, sweating. He just tossed his bike, and he pulls out a knife. So my buddy is on scene. I pull up, and a sergeant pulls up, and he's far away with the knife. Like, not like super far, but I mean, he's like 15 feet away. And he's got this knife, and it's got like a blade at each end. It's this big knife. And my buddy has his taser out, and like, not even going to get into the tactical like breakdown of that. I pull out my gun, and the supervisor has his taser. And I start looking down, and there's a church down at the end of this street. And of all days, it's like, let's hand out food to the needy. And so the church is like full of people. We're 100 and something yard, maybe 100 yards away from the church, and there's a street. So it's like we're on a sidewalk on a block, then there's a street, then there's a church, and we're downtown. My buddy is yelling at him to drop the knife. He's got his taser. The sergeant's yelling at him to drop the knife, yelling at him in Spanish to drop the knife. And I've got my gun out, and I'm trying to undo my holster, thinking about the stupid little instruction booklet, that tells you you gotta do this. You gotta work through this before you ever hit the streets with it. And I'm just kind of MFing myself, like, just why did I do that? But it's like the new taser with the new circuitry and all this cool guy like whiz bang electronics in it, and they're rocking the X26s, which are good, but now they've moved on. So my buddy deploys his taser, and the sergeant deploys his, or no, my buddy deploys the taser, and it hits him in the chest. And I don't know if it was like bad like deployment. The other one, like, I don't know, maybe it went in his clothes and like he didn't get a good hit. But dude grabs the taser wires and cuts him with his knife. And I was like, oh man, like this dude's like for real. So, and every time we try and get a little bit closer, he'd like, posture and like hold the knife up. And so I'm still like yelling at the people in the middle of this, trying to get them out of the way, like, just get out of the way. And they're all like looking because, you can hear all the sirens and stuff coming because we're calling for more units and like a less lethal shotgun, just try and deal with them without lethal force. And we're walking closer and closer to the church. And I'm like, when this dude steps foot in the street, like, that's it. I'm going to shoot him because I can't let him go into this crowd all methed up with a knife. And he's already proven that the motions he was making is like, if we came close to try and apprehend him, he was going to stab us. So I'm like, he's going to stab innocent people. And so then my buddy like reloads, he's walking away, and the sergeant and my buddy deploy their tasers again, one for the second time, one for the first time. And the dude reaches back and rips the barbs out of his back. So like zero effect for second and third tase. I've still got my gun out, and just we're getting even closer now to the sidewalk, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to shoot this dude. And just out of nowhere, taser comes out, and I put my like gun hand down because I'm like, if this doesn't work and he charges us or whatever, like I'm not gonna reholster. And I know the policy because I would tell it to people, like, you should not have less lethal and lethal out. It doesn't say you shall not have. And I don't even know if that would have changed my mind completely. But what they're worried about is like sympathetic, or involuntary trigger pull. So put the gun down by my like thigh, hit this dude, and it hits him in the throat and the stomach, and he just like walked up like timber fallen, and probably like 30 feet from the sidewalk, like the corner, dude just completely locks up. We were able to get the knife out and stuff. And that was like the first time at the police department that I thought I was going to shoot somebody. And so that was kind of crazy. The Yeah, so that was crazy. And it just really made me like think about tactics. What are we teaching? This and that, and like the drills of like, is 21 feet too close, or inside 21 feet too close? Like, what are cops thinking about when they go to calls, like with firearms versus like edged weapons? Like, when should we have a taser out? When should we have a baton out? When should those change? I just really started getting in my head about stuff like that. Yeah, like, so I was just like really focusing then on like during that time of being at the PD, a lot of my resources were spent, taking drug addicts to jail. That was just like one of the calls where I was like, oh man, like this is really important. But drug addicts and drug users, like associating them with property crimes, and just, I'm going to take everybody to jail. And, you go to these calls that are super sad because those guys and gals that I take to jail were somebody's kids, and a lot of them had kids. And going to these houses where you interact with these little children and they have drug addict parents. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think some of the calls, probably too many, I was putting myself like in the kid's shoes and like, hey, why are they being exposed to this? It was just wearing down on me slowly over time, because I was going to the VA to process trauma and stuff from my time in the Army, but I wasn't really processing anything that I was like just picking up as a law enforcement officer. Go to just like we do in the Army, but I feel like the trauma exposure is more consistent, at least for me, in the world of first responders, where you come up with this like dark humor to explain things. Like, you go to suicides that are like terribly sad and terribly disgusting and gruesome. And the way to deal with that so you don't break down, one would be alcohol and drugs, and another way is dark humor. And so instead of like saying something like, wow, that call really affected me and it was really sad and I need to process some of the images that I just saw, it's like, oh, did you see that guy's brains or body parts and this and that? You make jokes that aren't appropriate, but they're appropriate for the time and the way that we deal with things. And so I'd go to a bunch of those calls and, not process it and just put it in the rucksack over and over again. And one of them was a teen suicide, and it was super sad. This person was like bullied for some decisions that they made in life and didn't want to go to graduation, so they just committed suicide. And it's like, you go there with medics, and the medics don't want to deal with it because they, like deal with it in any like emotional capacity because they know it's just as horrible as I know, like what I know. And so we go there. This kid's obviously deceased. Mom is freaking out. She doesn't know that he's deceased. And the medics are like, hey, we're leaving. So I'm standing there with mom trying to figure out like what's going on with like what have they done in the past like 8 hours to end up where they are now. And the medics roll out with their empty gurney. And I'm like, in my head, like, you assholes, but like, I know, like, I'd rather be where they're at because they're going to leave. And now I get to deal with the aftermath with all the family and stuff. And, it just took a lot. Like, so they leave, and mom, like, now I have to tell mom, like, that her kid's dead. And that does not go well, understandably so. And then they give you these stupid ass forms. It's like, it's needed for the job, but it's not needed for humanity. Like, what that lady needs is a hug and someone to be with her. And I'm asking questions like, who's your kid's doctor? Who's their dentist? When, and I feel like now if I was a parent, I'd be like, get out of here. Like, I need to grieve as a parent. I'm not like, society doesn't want me to cry and like be a person around this grieving mom, but I just sit there and go, well, I can call you a chaplain. This is awkward. Like, I want to get out of here. So whenever you're ready to start answering questions, let me know. Like, and I don't say that, but I just like give it a second. Like, do you want me to call a chaplain? Do you want this? Do you want that? And on the inside, it's like, I'm crushed. This is super sad. Now I have to wait with this family until a medical examiner comes to take the body away. And then we just like do the awkward French exit of like, sorry, your kid ended their life and turned today into forever your worst day on earth. And and that was another thing. Like, after that call, it's just like, okay, like, I say bye to the other cop, and like, I guess I'll go back and write a report and go eat lunch now and wait for the other call. And it's just like, that wasn't the most gruesome call, but it's just like, dang it, like, this is terrible, and it's hard on your heart and your soul. And after you do that over and over and over and over and over again, it just really starts to like tear away at your soul. And also for me with my faith, like, how is this a God who saves? And look at what's going on in the world. No one is calling Petaluma Police Department or any police department to be like, hey, can you send an officer over to our house? And we get there and they're like, we just wanted you to see what dinner looks like at the Smith household. Like, we're all functioning and happy. No one's a substance abuser. No one, like, everyone's getting good grades. We have dinner at the table every night. It's like, you're getting sent to a call and you have 30 minutes to deal with 15 years of bad parenting and bad marriage. And it's just like, you go in and keep doing that. And then, like, another thing that happened to me was I used to let DUI drivers go. Like, if they weren't smashed, if I was like, they're just like probably on the border, like a 0.08, 0.10. But I pulled them over for like a tail light and not like some egregious violation where I'm like, oh man, they're like really dangerous. I'd let them go. And I went to a fatal DUI collision out on like Lakeville Highway, this like 50 mile an hour 2-lane, no divider, just crazy road where we get a lot of like fatal crashes. I went out there and pull up on scene. A buddy and I were at Starbucks, pull up on scene, and I go look at the driver, and she's clearly deceased. And there's a girl in the back, like screaming for her mom, but she was asleep in the back seat and didn't know what happened. She's like, "Hey, what's wrong with my mom?" Like, and it's like one of the saddest things I've ever been to. And find out later that the other driver, who was like pretty messed up, was drunk. And I was like, I'm never doing that again. Like, and then I went on this DUI rampage for a while where it's just like, I've seen what it can do. And if you're cool with me and you're not over a .20 and I have to take you to jail, or you don't have any other circumstances where I have to take you to jail, like worst case scenario and best case scenario is you're getting your picture taken at the PD, you're getting booked, and you're getting a citation, and I'm towing your car. But you don't get to hurt anybody tonight. And that turned into like my like mantra when I was working, well, nights and days. I was really into DUI enforcement and drugged DUI enforcement. Yeah, it that fatal DUI like kind of just like turned some gears in my head that shifted my focus. And I was still like, going after the drug addicts and the drug dealers and writing search warrants for phones and whatever I could, cars, just whatever I could to get after some drug abusers. But the violence and stuff, victims of violence, like it just started affecting me different. And then in 2018, I went to um, a domestic violence call that kind of changed like the scope of my law enforcement career. But it was in April of 2018. Went to a DV call, and like for me, a lot of stuff centers around food. So I was trying to go to lunch, and it wasn't my call. And I just like sent a message over our computers to this other guy that I knew would be like a fellow fat kid with me. And we were going to Panda Express for some lunch and got diverted for this domestic violence call that wasn't in my beat. And I was all butthurt that like I had to go to somebody else's call. And as I'm going there, it's ramping up. Like this guy has a gun. She's seen the victim seen it recently, and he's waiting in the parking lot. And so I pop my AR out because I'm like always thinking about what should I bring to this call. And I pull up in this apartment complex, and our body cameras is just like one. I think it's funny, but our body cameras have a 30-second playback. Like so, if you activate your body camera, it'll rewind 30 seconds, but there's no audio. And so I pull up like nose to nose, like away from this parking lot area, nose to nose with a bunch of kids that are about to smoke some marijuana. And like one of them has this huge bong, and he sees me and I have a rifle, and I'm like, you might want to get the F out of here. And you see a kid like move the bong, start up the car, and drive away. And so, I've got my rifle out, and I start like making my way towards the parking lot and looking for this car, but there's tons of cars everywhere. And I know the last four of the plate of the license plate, but I can't see it. And I'm kind of like pieing around all these cars to look for somebody. And I see this dude and he's drinking. And I, tell him like, let me see your hands. And he puts the bottle down and he's like, are you ready to kill me? And so I tell him, like, let's not do that. I get on the radio, tell him, what I have going on. And then I'm just like kind of vapor locked on or whatever, target locked on this dude. And I can see he's got a gun in his waistband. So other cops end up coming out there. We kind of have a standoff for over an hour. And at this point, I'm rested, like I have my mag rested on a hood of a car, and I'm just like in a pretty good position, like for taking a single shot, and we're like 25 yards away from him. And the dude ended up pointing the gun at some other cops, and I shot him. So I shot him one time in the side, and I was not expecting what happened because I shot him, and it was like he didn't like fold up and like grab his side. He just fell down and like looked like he was dead. I was 20 yards away, but dudes on the SWAT team ran up with a shield, secured the gun, and then went into the apartment. Like some started rendering first aid, went into the apartment to check, make sure no one was in there like injured or whatever from something he had done previously. And I was like, well, I need to call my wife because I've just been in a shooting and I don't really know like what's going to happen next. So no cops got shot. The body worn cameras were they're so like at that time, like the newer technology, it's choppy where the frames per second, they couldn't tell if a shot went off, and they never like canvass the area, didn't secure a bullet that went into an apartment or anything in that direction, but no cops got hit from his bullet. um the guy went to the hospital, which is where my wife was working. Super weird. So she left the ER with one of her students just so she wouldn't be a part of his treatment. Um, and the guy ended up passing away like that night. I think that night, if not the next night. They did some surgeries and stuff. The bullet just like really kind of ravaged his innards. So he ends up passing away. We do all the interviews and stuff, and then just comes like the during that thing, I was like this drunk gangster, and he was like a self-proclaimed gangster. I don't know, wasn't from the area, but he told me that he was a Sereno gangster. I was like, there's no way that this drunk guy, this drunk untrained gangster, is going to beat the SWAT guy and the firearms instructor when he pulls out. Like in my head, I was like, when he pulls that firearm out, I'm going to shoot him. And he was just talking this and that, and I'm like watching him and looking through the red dot, but also like putting my head up because I'm not a sniper. I was an entry guy, but like this was just like I was just on patrol. So I'm not just watching him like a sniper would through like an optic. I'm like looking at the whole situation, making sure people don't come, this and that. But I was like, when, he wanted to do this suicide by cop, but when he pulls his gun out, I'm just going to shoot him. Knowing full well that I teach people, like, action is always faster than reaction. But in my head, I'm like, that's just something people say. Like, I'm going to beat him. And that dude was like talking, and he had his hands up and he just went whoop and put the gun like to his head faster than I could take it off safe and pull the trigger. And that like kind of screwed me up. And then the other thing was, I was like, it's okay because I'm gonna beat him if he tries to point that gun at me or somebody else. And he got the gun fully leveled out. Like he just took a big breath, said he was sorry, and just went straight out. Like and and I shot him, but like in my mind, not in time. And I didn't tell anybody that. Like I was just like pretty ashamed that that dude beat me twice. I mean, it wasn't like it was just like he just had his hand like this and just like a quarter of a second, and no one was judging me on that. Like that was me judging myself. And all the SWAT guys came to like the hotel room that I was sequestered in, and like, hey, good job. Got a lot of calls like, I'm glad it was you. And I understand the sentiment of that, but I was like, that's a lot of pressure, and I didn't want to shoot and kill anybody. Like that, I didn't feel like that good about it. But also like that, I understand that that guy, like made his decision on what he was going to do, knowing full well what I was going to do after that. We, I was getting all these calls and all this support, and then I had 4 days off, but it was like a critical incident debrief, first one of my career. And that one made sense to me. That incident made sense to me. Like, guy pulls gun, points at cops, gets shot. All the suicides, all the drug abused children, all the domestic violence, like, that doesn't make sense to me. And I'd go to these called the DUI crash, like fatals, whatever. Like, those are ones that like I need to process also, because that's just like, it's full of victims. This guy's a victim. It registered differently with me. And I'm like, we should have had critical incident debriefs for years, like not just on like, oh, if you shoot somebody, you get a critical incident debrief. That being said, I never asked for one for anything else. And I should have. And I should have dealt with some of those other things differently. But I was just, I guess, I wanted more from my leadership at the time. And I didn't do much to provide the leadership with any feedback. So I don't completely fault them, but I do fault them a little bit. So do the critical incident debrief, do lawyer interviews with the DA investigators and everybody, and then go get qualified on new firearms, because they took my rifle for evidence and stuff, which is totally normal. And then I was supposed to go back to work that Saturday. So it was like Tuesday, and I was not ready, and I knew I wasn't ready, and it was like one of the hardest things I did to ask for more. I had the sergeant that's like, "Hey, LT, we're all good to go. Like, we'll be there on Saturday." And I'm like, "Dude, don't speak for me." And that's what I'm thinking in my head, but I don't have the courage to say it. And I finally called the lieutenant and said, like, "Hey, I need another day off to spend with my family." It's just been a lot of phone calls, and like, I haven't been unplugged for a minute. So that very next day, that I go on patrol, one of the first calls of the morning is a suicidal man with a gun call. And so we go to this like park in Petaluma, and there's a van there, and girlfriend calls in saying that her boyfriend's suicidal and they've been in an argument, and he just wants to do like a suicide by cop. And this is my first day back, and I'm like, this is insane. Like, I'm going to kill somebody else my first day back. And in my head, I'm like, if I shoot this dude, I'm literally going to like take off my gun belt, chuck my rifle, and just like take all my shit off and walk back to the station. Like, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not just going to get in this cycle of like violence, of hurting people. And in my head, I was like, that's where I'm like, this is going to happen. And thank God, like, the dude freaked out, and he came out with his hands up, like projectile vomiting and yelling that it was a fake gun. Like, and he didn't have it in his hand, but he came out of the van with his hands up. And instead of debriefing that, like, "Hey, where's everybody at? I know that's kind of crazy, like, to do the same thing over again, your first shift back." We just like all went to other calls. And that was like another like missed mark. So that started a pretty bad year for me. Not like to get too far into it, but a dude from that I used to work with at the county jail took his life, and I think that year. Had San Francisco Sheriff's Department, like super sad stuff. And then one of the guys on the regional FBI team that was doing our training, and like we had just gone to a Christmas party with, ended up shooting himself. I'm like, what is going on? And I'm getting nominated for Officer of the Year, and my marriage is falling apart. I'm falling apart. But I'm just keeping my shit together at work, and I'm a hot mess, like really hot mess. and I went to a SWAT call out on the 4th of July. So like this dude, Mac, had killed himself. That was in February. May, I went to like this really kind of gross, horrific, terrible plane crash on Memorial Day in Petaluma, where this couple died in a plane crash on a main road. I don't know how they fell out of the sky and didn't hit another car. And like I left that, not laughing at the situation, but I left that and just went right home, like a couple blocks away. And like my kids are all excited to see me. And I'm like, what? What just happened? Like, how did I leave that scene and go to like the little kids, like, Daddy? And I just like eventually your switch of like going from cop to dad to cop to dad to cop to husband, cop to dad, it just fails and gets broken. And I'd gone to like these calls and stuff where people are like, cops are like really like excited and wound up, and like I'm just like one level, like nothing was bugging me really on the outside. I had like adrenal failure, but like my anger and stuff internally was just through the roof. And my thing was like I really like thought this dude Mac, that was like this longtime veteran, uh, military vet, longtime FBI, like SWAT dude, like dialed in guy, great teacher, like doing good things for our police department, teaching us tactics, solid gang cop, like just crushing it. How did he go from the FBI Academy, 20 years ago, to taking his own life? And then I look back at like, I'm not suicidal at all. But how do I go from the police academy in 2007 to like being so angry, pushing away my wife, pushing away my kids? Like, where's that next jump from like where I was to like where I'm going to be, like thinking about putting a gun in my mouth? And that like kind of came to a head at this SWAT call that we didn't even do anything. We did a surround and call out. And I was convinced that when we went to the house that one of my buddies was going to get killed. Like, he's like my best friend at the PD, and I needed to go in there before him so that like, cause he still had like a shred of life left. And I was just dead inside. Sending my wife to church with the kids, like by herself. And I just came up with a reason why I didn't go. I mean, like I was a mess. And finally someone like told my wife, somehow she found out about this West Coast post trauma retreat. And I called that place and set up, like I just broke it down to them and told them I was like at rock bottom and I needed help. And I set that up before I even took time off of work. So after that SWAT call out, 2 weeks went by, 3 weeks went by, and I went into my lieutenant's office and I was like, "Hey, LT, like I'm not doing well." He's like, "Oh, what's up?" And I told him that I needed a break, and he goes, "Okay, for how long?" And I'm like, "I can't do this anymore." And like I don't know if it was on his desk or whoever's, but right next to that is like, "Hey, we want to nominate this guy." It was a supervisor and a colleague were like, "We want to nominate this guy for Officer of the Year." And I had just gotten a Medal of Valor for the well, I guess it was like a year before, for the taser incident with the dude with the knife. I ended up getting a Medal of Valor for the OIS that happened the year before the shooting. And it's like just all the way to the bottom. And like I was just burning the wick at both ends. I didn't know what was going to happen. But like I wanted someone to crash into me so bad. so that I could go to work with like a broken leg and be like, I need help, because I was not strong enough to ask for it. Didn't matter. And like they'd be like, guys are like, oh, that dude's dialed in. He's on the SWAT team. Hot mess. Hot mess. So yeah, that I ended up getting the time off and started like a workers' comp claim, and I never went back to the police department. So definitely not what I thought was going to happen with I thought I was going to be a cop for 30 years, but that wasn't the plan.
So what happened when you started going to all the treatment and everything?
So I went to sign up for West Coast Post Trauma Retreat. It's a place out of Napa, California. And I ended up going, a slot opened up. So they own this property in Napa, and then they have satellites in different parts of the country. And I went to one in Seattle, Washington, and it's a 6-day retreat. You're there with 5 other clients and a bunch of peers that are first responders, and that place, one, like, saved my life, and 2, changed my life forever. You start putting together stuff that's happened in your childhood and how that impacts the way that you receive and process trauma. You find out that you're normal. Like, it's very common for first responders to come from homes that aren't perfect. One of the things that I left out is my dad ended up dying in 2011 from because he had relapsed when I was like 2013, or when I was 13, he had relapsed, and got a dirty needle in San Francisco and contracted hepatitis C and ended up dying of liver cancer, cirrhosis. So figuring out, and I had been taken to these houses for Christmas and stuff after my parents split up, like at his sponsor's house. The first arrest warrant that I ever made an arrest on in Petaluma was at my dad's sponsor's house. Like, I had a dysfunctional, like, there's families and cops and firefighters and soldiers and stuff that have had unfortunately, a way more dysfunctional upbringing. But mine was pretty bad looking back at it. And I never processed it. And it changes the way that you process trauma. And it makes you want to go into law enforcement and fire service to, like, oh, I'm going to fix this and fix that. And I don't want people to get into law enforcement and fire and EMT and medics services to fix things. I want them to get in there to help people. Because if you go in there like that, you're going to fix everything. You're going to fall short. You're going to judge yourself on that, and it's not going to be as healthy as it could be. So I went to WCPR, learned a bunch of this stuff, got introduced to EMDR, which is the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. It's where your eyes track like a stimulus, and you scrub some of the stuff associated with your trauma. And they kind of just like cracked me open, and after the 6 days you get sent home like a new person, but you have to like take advantage of that because it's a 6-day treatment program. It isn't like 6 weeks or 6 months. So, just a lot of therapy. And then the biggest thing for me is going back there and giving back. I think I've been to 10 retreats now, a couple in Napa, or I guess more than a couple in Napa, and then 3 or 4 in Seattle. And just giving back is like, one, it helps confirm that like you're not alone in your journey dealing with PTSD, and that there's other people that have been through it and you can call them and talk to them. Like, I mean, that's the big thing. Like, you're not alone and you can be fixed. The point of like sending peers back there that are like a little bit further along in the journey is like, yeah, it's still hard, but it gets better. And you just have to like put in the same hard work that you put in when you're in the service in Iraq and Afghanistan, wherever you go, or like pushing around a police car or picking up people in an ambulance or putting out fires. Like, you got to do that same hard work for yourself, and you deserve it, and your families deserve it. So, I got back from the retreat, and then you're just dealing with some like bureaucratic stuff. The department was good the whole time I was going through the retirement process. But in August of 2020, and there's a lot that I miss, and a lot of friends and my family. And my cousin's a sergeant now, and there's a lot of stuff that I miss, but I absolutely do not miss being traumatized on a regular basis. I know like that I would be better at dealing with it with the tools I have now. Like, if I went back, and I know people that have gone back after going to WCPR, it isn't like if you go to this, you're getting retired. It'll give you the tool to get you through the trauma that you 100% will be exposed to. But I know tons of people that have gone back and promoted, or just been like better equipped to deal with life in all aspects after going to WCPR, or programs like Save a Warrior, or Warrior's Heart out in Texas. It's run by like a
Tom Spooner.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the West Coast post trauma isn't like the only one, but it's the one that I went through, and I love giving back to it. And I'll also tell people like, go to whatever one you can get into. If your organization or you have the opportunity to go to multiple, go to multiple. Like, there's more than one way to do this. And so the thing is, like, just pick up the phone and ask for help, because it's not worth it to do it any other way.
Yeah, and any one of those professions, whether you're in the Army or I can say the Army's gotten better, in 18 years. But I don't know how the police department is, but like standing up and saying like, dude, I need some help, like I need to take a break, it's not as frowned upon now as it was. And that's also,
For,
I mean, I think it's also a pride thing, and even like thinking about it too, like even if you work in those environments, being able to tell people, just saying like, hey, I can't do this anymore, or I need time off, like not listening to the peanut gallery, because the peanut gallery, in my experience, is probably going through a lot of the same things.
totally.
It's a pride thing, And what you said, I mean, I say it all the time, and like I know you've been around since like since the beginning of time, right? But I mean, especially like the last year, even when I like pitch you this idea, like doing this, and I was like, oh man, so like I'm really thinking of like the or like what human performance means to me is that physical, mental, emotional, spiritual fitness aspect, right? And then leadership, because self leadership is arguably the one of the most difficult ones that's there. And you're probably going to be 90% right at the time when you say that dude's super squared away, but when he goes home, his life is a complete dumpster fire because he's way too prideful to say, you know, hey, I need help. And I think it's gotten more prevalent now too with social media. And you have a lot of these guys, with great backgrounds that are just saying like it's okay. I guess the question I would ask you too is, what would you tell the younger you now? You know, when you were crashing and burning, like, dude, it's okay. Like, how would you have like worked through that if somebody had come up to you like a mentor and been like, dude, I've been where you're at. It's okay. Do you need to take a break? You know what I mean?
Yeah. For one, I would have sought out help for myself, just like I would seek out training. Like, like I'd want to go to some like Frank Proctor, another like Army vet, has his shooting class, and I'd be like, I got to go to that. Or Northern Red, and these are just companies that like I've sought out. Like, oh, I want to go, train with these guys, but I never did the like, oh, I want to see how I can prolong my life and happiness by seeking out mental health help and like asking for like, hey, isn't there something we can do if we went to this bad call that's super sad and ended tragically, going to the leadership and asking them, like even like starting the conversation of what can we do to help us? We're so worried about liability and not knocking any of these things, but like emergency vehicle operations, sexual harassment, just whatever it is, like, oh, we got to train on this, we got to train on this, we got to train on this. Like, what are we doing to keep ourselves like razor sharp or whatever you want to say, like at the tip of the spear? Because I'm just going to come out and say it, like cops have and first responders have and service members have a substance abuse problem. They have
And it's
this
normalized. It's normalized.
for sure, but it's like we need to deal with that and recognize it. And some people, like I think that leaders need to use their authority a little bit differently. And instead of like let's normalize mental health. So that means instead of like a just a regular police officer like me asking for help, which I should like we should do and encourage, at a certain point, leaderships like need to say, hey, Giomi, you were at this bad call where a teenager, a child, took their own life. So you and the other cops there need to go talk to a shrink or a clinician. It takes away the ability for me to be like, hey, Chad's going to go talk to a therapist. He must be a little fill in the blank of what you want to call him. And instead, it could be like, you're in this position of authority and leadership. Sometimes it's your job to make the difficult calls. And you can be like, hey, Lieutenant so and so made me go to this. And it would normalize it within 5 years. Like, like we all deal with metrics and flow charts and stuff. So it's like, if you go to this call, and then was there a loss of life? Was there like no loss of life? And then if yes, okay, was it this? Was it that? And then the flow chart goes to like, you shall see a therapist. And there's no more ability to judge your peers or even your subordinates or leadership, because like let's be real, like sergeants, lieutenants, captains, everybody in these organizations, battalion chiefs, company officers, whatever, they all get subjected to trauma, or they all have been on their way up, and they're not prone, or they're not like, they're all prone to having first responder burnout. Same with the military. Like, just because you're a major in the army or an admiral doesn't mean you've never been exposed to trauma. And I think that we should normalize getting help. And that means proactive help. Same thing, like same reason why you stretch. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so you prevent and mitigate injury. So like if you go to a bad call or you come back from a deployment and someone, I don't care if it's an accident, like that's somebody's friend, somebody's brother, somebody's relative. Like if a service member or a cop or what, like gets injured or killed, like you need to just go to therapy. And if you want to talk about nothing, that's fine. But eventually you're going to be like, hey, you know what? Like when so and so got killed, or I went to this call where whatever it was, like a close air support and civilians get killed. Like that's terrible. I understand that we're like engaged in combat, but like what you just saw isn't normal and it's traumatic, and you need to go get help instead of drinking, using drugs, having extra relationships that you shouldn't be having, whatever the case is, gambling, eating, shopping. You're always trying to get like a rush, and those aren't the right ways to do it. So I would say make mental health normal, and leaders need to be one, getting themselves help, because that's leadership also, is like proving that it's okay to be struggling, and also like, I'm struggling, so I'm going to go do something about it. Yeah, I guess that was a really long-winded way of just saying, like, make mental health normal, because it's very important,
No,
especially
it
for
is.
population.
Yeah, 100%. I think, you know, but I think because there's so much more that you can dive into, right? And I think it's like, well, how did the relationship go? How did this go? How did that go? And um, I think everything you've said has been like, one, super important. Two, like even just saying it, like, hey, been to traumatic calls, done this, done that, marriage, personal, like it'll relate with somebody, you know. Uh,
The
I know.
marriage is super important too, because you're setting an example for your kids. Just like, hey, mom and dad are going to argue. We'll do it in a healthy way, and we'll show you some resolution that's healthy, whether that's apologizing to each other or like, hey, we're going to counseling to make our communication more effective. It isn't just like arguing with no resolution and then like just repeating the process. Like, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So do something about it and change it.
Yeah, and I use the analogy with people all the time. Like, you tell your kids not to do something, hey, don't text and drive, and then they look up in the front seat, and people are like,
Yeah,
hey,
exactly.
just hold on, I gotta send Dario a message real quick. Like, he can't wait. I've got to let him know.
And yeah, I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, I think everybody is. But yeah, dude. Well, any last parting words? I know it's been almost 2 hours.
Dang. Take care of yourself and do it in front of other people so that they can see that it's the right move to make.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you.
You're welcome, buddy.
Appreciate it.